Seth, Dreams and Projection of Consciousness by Jane Roberts. Introduction by Robert F. Butts. Read by Martin John. Originally published by Stillpoint Publishing, 1987. Continued Part 1, Intrusions from the Interior Universe, a Subjective Journal. Number 2. A note of subjective background. The impetus behind unconscious intrusions. But what initiated the idea construction experience? Even when I wrote the Seth material, the book, I didn't clearly understand why it happened or connected it in any way with my previous life or beliefs. It seemed like a complete intrusion. The present book, devoted to dreams and subjective experience, led me into deeper self-examination. In preparation, I reread my own records and poetry. The poetry itself provides a clear record of subjective thoughts and emotions, and it was through reading this old poetry that I found clues that showed me the points of continuity between my life before my psychic initiation and after it. Looking back, it is obvious that I had unknowingly reached a crisis of development, a crisis that comes to each of us in our early adulthood. The rest of our lives depends upon what happens. Either we grow to a new understanding of the meaningfulness of existence, or we lose much of the force and purpose with which your youth automatically endows us. I'm including in this chapter a few poems as notes of a subjective autobiography to show what events triggered this first release of unconscious material on my part, opening the doors to the interior universe. For now I believe that certain personal conditions are characteristic prerequisites for such developments, that the channels of an intuitive knowledge are opened according to the intensity of individual need. This need might not be consciously recognized, as it was not in my case, but it must be present. The poems show my attitude toward life in general just before my psychic experiences began. When you see the type of poetry that I was writing then, you will understand immediately why the ideas in idea construction were such a revelation to me. Incidentally, I considered these poems as aesthetic creations. I made no effort at the time to examine my own subjective states. I simply expressed them as best I could and then criticized the poems on their aesthetic merits. The way I saw life was the way life was. It never occurred to me that my own attitudes had anything to do with it. These poems were all written in spring and summer of 1963 and concerned life in general. First poem. 1 and 1. 1 and 1 makes nothing. Arithmetic destroys us all. Subtraction is the answer to our hypothesis. Morning makes sense to any animal, and each one feels death's decimal. We've never learned to add for all our numbers' worth. Division and subtraction will total up to death. I remember writing this poem on one of a series of dreary afternoons in which it seemed that life in general had little meaning. Poem, On This Hazy Day. On this hazy, lazy day, all thoughts drop to sudden end, as if the sullen air into itself a puncture drew. So trees and houses and all we know were gently drawn to follow through. Then quickly, like a holocaust, a container tipped at end at last. All our thoughts slide away into a hole that time has made. Rob always enjoyed excellent health, but in 1963 he came down with severe back trouble. Certainly this frightened me and was probably partly responsible for the feelings expressed in the following poem. Feelings, I think, that are quite prevalent during early adulthood. Poem, Magic Was. Magic was my middle name. I was so brave and tall, no one knew who I was then, myself least of all. I was untouched 10 years ago by love and even pain. The world touched me or touched me not. To me it was the same. But then the flesh knew it was flesh, and howled out its defeat, and I was flamed to life by vulnerability. The next is not as good a poem, aesthetically, as the others, but it was written to Rob and clearly shows the growing sense of panic which I viewed the passing years. I remembered writing it, half in tears. Poem, To Rob. Let's cut loose, you and I, zigzag like fools beneath the sky. Follow the crazy, plunging moon through secret towns like crying clowns. See the wild world's circus spread upon the earth's great sacred ground. The masks at midnight tumble down, and the great stone faces stare. Beaches sparkle under stars. They'll be there for 1,000,000 years. Seas lead up in endless waves, but we live far better lives. Let's cut loose, you and I, before we've grown old and scared, too timid to breathe, too fearful to blink, too cautious to cross a quiet street. No magic then will move our blood, nor moonlight rush through brittle bone. Then let us plunge while there is time, through worlds to look back upon. In other words, my poetry finally revealed to me my state of mind before idea construction and Seth. Little by little, using it as a guide, other memories came back to me, all trivial in comparison to real tragedy, and yet, to me, bitterly depressing. The death of a kitten that year led me to write. Poem. Death came in and took my cat, and passed right by my dog. He chased her through the living room, over the woolen rug. I sat there and never knew. I sat right there and never saw. A small household tragedy, the death of a cat, yet to me it contained the question of the unqueasiness of life and the value of consciousness. Didn't anyone or anything care that one cat had died? I felt guilty even considering the question. In a world where humans slaughtered their own kind constantly, who in their right mind would give a moment's thought to a cat's consciousness? Yet either all life was sacred, or none of it was. So I brooded. And when I looked around me, it seemed that for all of man's good intentions, he only transmitted the errors of his race. that each man or woman unknowingly perpetuated the particular sins and failings of their families. I wrote one of my most pessimistic of poems. Old hates. Old hates lie in wait for the infant as he grows into a man. Then they leap upon him when he puts his father's coat on, when the father's bones drop into the grave. The lice flock up as the dark earth falls to feed on a son's guilt love. No man can look in his son's face. What was done to him he does in turn, for he carries the hate in his blood. Ghosts of days forgotten, tragedies unseen, unspoken, wait in the past's proud flesh, and nothing can shake them off. And in Mass, for the race, I saw only one answer. Poem. The terms. I dig my own grave. With dignity, we are all gone. There is nothing else to say. Doom was a toy ball. We toss it high and laugh to see the rockets rise. Our ashy laugh scattered over the countryside. We never understood the terms. Now remember that spring. Recall sitting at my desk writing poetry, caught up in a feeling that nature was betraying us all with its promise of hope and renewal. It was almost mechanical. I thought, as if some second-hand god kept reusing the same leaves each year over and over again, and were too childish to see beneath the subterfuge. Yet the same May, while I was writing the most pessimistic of poetry, I also remember a break in my mood, quickening of spirit that was reflected in two poems of quite a different nature. The first was written on my birthday. Poem. Birthday. I shall never be adult, but I am growing wise, like some crazy holy child, with ghosts inside its head. At midnight I rush to the river's edge. I'd bay at the moon if I could, and fish in birds in sky and sand, cascade in a splash in my blood. My fingers are leaves that rustle and drop. Birds fly through the eyes of my skull. Clouds float atop my spinning head, and stars burn the moons of my toes. Mountains and hillsides cut through my arm. Rivers fly past my pulse. Generations of ghosts laugh at my talk, while my tissues burn and go up in smoke. 2 days later, I sat at my desk, idly watching the sunshine on my bare arm, and was suddenly astonished by the miracle of skin. I wrote the following poem, which is mentioned later by Seth as an indication of the inner knowledge that was almost ready to burst into consciousness. Poem. Skin. Though this crisscrossed flesh mesh tastes like peach and feels like peach fuzz, all utterly mergings of gold and green and red, sunnily rendered dizzy and delicious, still touching it with eyes is like peering through a fence with wires cunningly connected, 1,000,000 to an inch. The wind on the arm blows the hair, and at the base a golden mole, such a speck as a peach might have, but the hair arches back to show a gaping hole. and each ounce of flesh is a fence, erected roundly and snug, about hidden landscapes, suns and shadows, inroads laced with prickly shrubs. Peer through. The holes are not big enough to see much, but dreams travel wondrous wires. Fires brighter than autumn moons throw leaping shadows on the arm. Days and nights burn like stars in the twinkling meadows of the skull, and through the fence of peach-blooming flesh other fruits blossom beyond reach. I think that my idea construction experience was initiated, then, at least in part, by the need that is apparent in these poems. The last two show early indications of emerging intuitive knowledge. I believed that I had gone as far as my intellect and normal creativity could take me, and that new channels were opened when I needed them most. Generally, I think, these other channels open when we have ceased to rely upon most of the answers that have been given to us by others and found wanting. Along these lines, I wonder if tranquilizers often cut us off from such intuitive breakthroughs by preventing us from coming to grips with the true darkness of soul that can precede such experiences, and by allowing us to accept temporary, objective and artificial solutions. I suppose that the idea construction experience could have gradually faded from memory, losing much of its vitality if the manuscript did not exist as a constant reminder. But this is difficult to imagine. Instead, the theories were made manifest in my life, becoming facts of my existence. I never would have been able to accept Seth and the sessions without that initial introduction to non-physical information. That experience, then, led to the sessions and to this book, containing enough energy and motive force not only to change my life, but also to affect the experience of others. I've dealt with this extensively here because creative, unconscious energy is often a part of the dream state. Apparently, in my case at that time, the intrusive, unconscious material had to be propelled through my consciousness during my waking state, since I never regained memory of the initial dream in which the information was originally given. Time and time again, the inner centers of our being come to our aid through subjective promptings, either in waking, dream, or trance states. Through the dream experiences related later in this book, this will become quite clear. Dreams, interpretations, experiences in mystic consciousness, all, I believe, have their prime source outside our usual consciousness and mode of activity. This book is concerned mainly with dreams, but it will also stress the true mobility of our consciousness, which makes possible dreaming and astral projections, and those unconscious abilities that are so vital to our functioning. At the time of the idea construction experience, the Seth sessions themselves were undreamed of course. So while this book is devoted to Seth's theories on the nature of dreams and his instructions on their use, It is not meant to be a definitive statement. Seth continues to deliver material on dreams along with other subjects. Those of you who want a more general ideas of Seth's views can refer to the Seth material, the book. Here, I'll give the material on dreams, as it was given to us in succeeding sessions, particularly in the early part of the book. This automatically represents the material in order, preserving the sense of continuity, and serves as a progressive, subjective journal of dream experiences as Rob and I, and later my students, followed Seth's suggestions. This method of presentation also gives the reader a built-in opportunity to try the experiments for himself, just as Seth gave them to us as we went along. Before Seth began a discussion of dreams, and as a preliminary, he explained the natural mobility of human consciousness and outlined the main features of the interior universe that could be glimpsed in both waking and dream states and which underlie physical reality. This introduction offers a natural pathway into the area of dreams, part of the interior universe, and to the other states of consciousness possible within the dream framework. The first portion of this book will therefore deal with this material and with our first explorations into that inner reality. End 2. Thank you, Jane Roberts. Peace, light, and love. Aloha.